Welcome back to LeapTalk English, where real conversations help your English grow naturally. I'm Mary.
And I'm Albert. And Mary, today's topic is one I actually feel personally about, so bear with me if I get a little more honest than usual.
Albert, you say that every week, and every week I appreciate it.
Fair enough. So here's the topic. For a very long time, and I mean a very long time, men have been taught that talking about how they feel is somehow weak, that real strength means staying silent, keeping it together, never letting anyone see the cracks.
And that message has done an enormous amount of damage, quietly, over generations.
Silently, which is kind of the whole problem.
Exactly. But something is shifting right now, and it is one of the most important shifts happening in conversations about mental health globally in 2026.
Men are starting to talk. Not all of them, not easily, not without resistance, but more than before, and that matters enormously.
So today we are asking, why has it taken so long? What made silence feel so necessary? And what is finally starting to change?
This conversation is for everyone, men and women, because understanding this changes how we show up for the people we love.
As always, we are doing this in clear, natural B2 level English. Just relax, follow the conversation, and let your English grow naturally as you listen.
And stay with us until the end for our word tour, where we slow down and explain the most useful words and phrases from today's conversation.
And before we begin, we would love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think men find it harder to talk about emotions? Has that been your experience? Tell us honestly.
All right, let's get into it.
So, Albert, let's start at the beginning. Where does this idea even come from, that men should not show emotion or ask for help?
It goes back a very long way. Across most cultures and throughout most of history, men were assigned a specific role: provider, protector, stable, strong, unshakable.
And those qualities in themselves are not bad things.
Not at all. Strength, reliability, calm under pressure, these are genuinely valuable.
But somewhere along the way, those qualities got twisted into something harmful.
They stopped being things a man could have alongside emotions and started being things a man was supposed to have instead of emotions.
As if feeling something and being strong were opposites, when really they are not opposites at all.
And boys grew up absorbing that message, sometimes directly. Be a man, stop crying, toughen up, don't be so sensitive.
And sometimes indirectly, just by watching the men around them, fathers and grandfathers and uncles who never spoke about struggle, who carried everything silently and called it dignity.
And what gets modeled becomes what feels normal. What feels normal becomes what feels safe.
So for many men, silence around emotions does not feel like repression. It feels like just how things are, like water to a fish. It is invisible because it has always been there.
And questioning it feels not just uncomfortable, but almost like a threat to identity. Because if being stoic is what it means to be a man, then showing vulnerability feels like losing something fundamental about yourself.
And that is such a painful trap, because the very thing that would help, talking, being honest, asking for support, feels like the thing that would make you less of who you're supposed to be.
And so men stay silent, and silence has a cost.
A very real, very measurable cost, because what does not get expressed doesn't disappear, it just goes somewhere else.
It comes out as anger instead of sadness, as withdrawal instead of asking for help, as physical illness instead of emotional honesty, as, in the most tragic cases, crisis that nobody around them saw coming.
Because they seemed fine. They always seemed fine. They were so good at seeming fine.
And the people who loved them had no idea because they were never given the chance to know.
And that gap between what men carry internally and what they show externally is one of the loneliest spaces a person can inhabit.
Completely surrounded by people who care about you, and completely alone with everything that actually matters.
So what is changing? Because something clearly is. The conversation is shifting. Slowly, but genuinely.
I think a few things are happening at once. The first is that more men in public life, athletes, celebrities, musicians, politicians, are starting to speak openly about their mental health struggles.
And that matters more than it might seem, because representation is powerful. When a man who embodies traditional strength, an athlete, a soldier, a successful leader, says publicly that he has struggled, that he has cried, that he has needed help,
It gives other men permission to say the same, because suddenly it's not about weakness anymore. It's just honesty, human honesty.
and when you see someone you respect being honest about struggle, the message shifts. It stops being, strong men don't feel this way, and it starts being, strong men feel this way and say so.
And that's a completely different invitation.
The second thing that's changing is generational. Younger men, particularly in their 20s and early 30s right now, grew up in a world that was already starting to have these conversations.
They grew up seeing therapy discussed more openly. They grew up with mental health language being more normalized. They grew up in a world that imperfectly, gradually, started telling them that feelings were not shameful.
And that doesn't mean they find it easy. The old messages are still there, still loud, but they have more permission than their fathers had, and they're using it.
And the third thing, and this one I find very moving, is that many men are starting to realize what silence has cost them.
Not in the abstract, but personally. Relationships that ended because they couldn't communicate honestly, friendships that stayed surface level for decades, a quiet emptiness they couldn't explain because they had never been given the words for it.
And hitting that wall, that moment of, I have everything and I'm still not okay, forces a reckoning that silence can no longer survive.
And that reckoning, painful as it is the beginning of something real.
So what does this mean for the people around men who are starting to open up? Because I think this matters for everyone listening, not just men.
It means when a man in your life finally tries to tell you something real, something honest, something that cost him something to say,
The response matters enormously.
more than almost anything else, because men who try to open up and are met with discomfort or advice when they needed listening or minimizing of what they shared,
Often close the door again, and it stays closed for a very long time.
but men who try to open up and are met with genuine presence, with someone who just listens without trying to fix, without judgment, without making it strange or not making it smaller either.
Just be there, calmly, warmly, without an agenda.
Because that's what changes everything, not the perfect response, just the genuine presence.
And for any man listening who recognizes himself in this conversation, who has been carrying something quietly for longer than he wants to, I want to say this directly.
Talking about how you feel is not weakness. It never was. It was always just human.
And the people who love you, they don't need you to be unshakable. They need you to be real.
And real is always enough. Okay, let's go into our word tour.
Let's do it.
First word, stoic. A stoic person is someone who endures pain, difficulty, or strong emotion without showing or complaining about how they feel.
For example, he had always been stoic about his problems, but privately he was exhausted by the effort of it. Or, stoic behavior is often praised in men, even when it comes at a serious personal cost. Repeat after us. Stoic.
Stoic.
Next, repression. Repression means pushing feelings, memories, or desires down below conscious awareness, not dealing with them, but keeping them buried.
For example, years of emotional repression made it genuinely difficult for him to identify what he was actually feeling. Or, repression does not make emotions disappear, it just delays and transforms them. Repeat, repression.
Repression. Next, modeled. When a behavior is modeled, it means it is demonstrated by someone else in a way that others observe and learn from, often without being explicitly taught.
For example, emotional silence was modeled for him by every man he looked up to as a child. Or, children learn how to handle emotions largely through what is modeled for them at home. Repeat, modeled.
Modeled. Next, reckoning. A reckoning is a moment of facing difficult truths, a point where reality can no longer be avoided or denied.
For example, Reaching his 40s without ever feeling truly connected to anyone brought him to a personal reckoning. Or, sometimes hitting a wall is the beginning of a reckoning that actually changes everything. Repeat, reckoning.
Reckoning.
Next, minimizing. Minimizing means treating something as less important or serious than it actually is, often unintentionally and in response to discomfort.
For example, when he finally opened up, she responded by minimizing what he shared, which made him regret saying anything at all. Or, people often minimize others' feelings, not out of cruelty, but out of not knowing how to respond. Repeat, minimizing.
Minimizing.
Next, normalized. When something is normalized, it means it has become accepted as ordinary or expected, no longer seen as unusual or shameful.
For example, therapy has become increasingly normalized, especially among younger generations. Or, normalizing conversations about mental health is one of the most important things a society can do. Repeat, normalized.
Normalized.
And finally, presence. Presence means being fully mentally and emotionally available in a moment, giving someone your genuine attention without distraction or agenda.
For example, what he needed most was not advice, but simply someone's calm presence while he figured out what he felt. Or, genuine presence is one of the rarest and most valuable things you can offer another person. Repeat, presence.
Presence.
And those were today's word tour words and phrases.
Together, they capture everything we explored today: the long history of male silence around emotion, what is finally beginning to shift, and what we can all do to make honest conversation feel a little safer for the people we love.
And wherever you are in this, whether you are someone working up the courage to speak or someone trying to be a safer person for others to speak to, you are already doing something important just by being here and thinking about it.
This is Mary.
And this is Albert. Thank you so much for listening to LeapTalk English. We will see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.